Hey everybody, this is Brian Moreland. For those who don't know me, I write horror fiction, mostly novels, novellas, and short stories. And I'm here today to do a reading. It's October 2020. It's almost Halloween, one of my favorite times of the year. And I want to thank and give a big shout out to Janine Pipe for inviting me to. She's doing celebrating Halloween month with what she calls Horror October, and I was graciously invited to read from one of my books. Some of my books include Tomb of Gods, which is an Egyptian thriller that came out earlier this year. I've also written a collection of novellas, The Witching House, The Seekers, and Darkness Rising. And today I'm going to do a reading of a novel called The Devil's Woods. The Devil's Woods is a book that I wrote I started it in college. So it's one of the first books that when I was just learning how to write fiction, I wrote a little novel that was a very, very, very early version of this book. And I tinkered with it for about 20 years while writing other books. And finally, back in, I guess it was 2012, I had this book just sitting on my computer that I hadn't even looked at it for several years. And I read the story and I really liked it so much that I revised it and finally finished it to the point where I felt like it was publishable. It's got everything from a haunted forest up in British Columbia, Canada, to a mystery that may be a creature or a serial killer, but people have been being abducted for over a century. So there's lots of mystery surrounding these woods. And the main characters are three siblings who were born on a Cree reservation. They're half Cree and half Caucasian, and when they were young, they left with their mother uh, to go live in Seattle, while their Cree father stayed on the reservation and was exploring whatever the mysteries around these woods called Makia Forest. They live. Makia Forest is like right next to uh, their reservation. And there's been disappearances, there's been spottings of ghosts and things like that. And my main character, Kyle, he's psychic. He has this. He's always been able to see ghosts, just um, as something he can't explain. But when he goes with his brother and sister and a few other people to stay at this cabin in the woods, on the reservation, he starts to see very mysterious things. So I'm going to read from one of the chapters in this book. They're already at the cabin, and they're Kyle's father's been missing. They thought he would be there, but he's nowhere to be found, and that's got Kyle concerned. Um, but here's one of the scenes where Kyle witnesses uh, something strange happening in the woods. Feeling restless, Kyle climbed out of bed. He went into the kitchen and made up a cup of chamomile tea. As he was leaning against the counter, sipping from the mug, he saw a twinkling of small lights out in the woods. He turned off the light above the sink and watched out the window. Two fireflies moved along the edge of the trees. They paused, side by side, like two silver buttons floating in blackness, like glowing eyes. Kyle's face got the familiar tingling sensations he felt whenever he peered into the spirit realm. He hid behind the wall, heart racing. Catching his breath, he ventured another look out the window. Lights were gone. The lights were gone. Kyle released a nervous laugh. What is it about these woods? He had witnessed strange phenomena like this many times in his life. Often, ghosts passed through a space barely visible and were gone in a blink. Only rarely did they make eye contact or notice that he was watching. When they did, he always got spooked. Kyle had never Kyle had never known what to do with this extraordinary gift or curse, however you wanted to look at it. So he invented a character for his novels. Unlike Kyle, Detective Winterbone had the ability to talk to ghosts and could peer into the spirit realm at will. Kyle's ability was more sporadic, and often he had to touch objects to connect with the spirit world. Some objects held visions, others didn't. Many sightings were random and too short to make much sense. But in some places, the vibrations of the dead were stronger, like his wife's art studio in his apartment, like these woods, where the souls remained in limbo, haunting the place. Those he feared because they were malcontent spirits and could harm him. Detective Winterbone had a gift for helping ghosts find their way to the next world. Kyle could only live among them as a helpless onlooker. Outside, the silver buttons returned to the edge of the forest. Kyle's face tingled again, but this time he didn't break eye contact. The glowing orbs moved closer. A head took shape in the moonlight, a pale oval face, dark braids hanging past the shoulders. A teenage girl wearing a sundress. She was so faint, barely an outline, and Kyle could see the trees through her. As she walked, the wind blew the hem of her dress. He held her gaze, not wanting this amazing vision to slip away. She crossed the back lawn, moving toward the cabin, disappearing and reappearing every 5 feet. When she reached the porch, her head craned toward Kyle, peering at him with those blazing silver orbs. He moved away from the window and snapped his eyes shut. Footsteps creaked on the porch steps. Oh shit. He held his breath. How would Winterbone handle this situation? He'd, he'd confront the ghost instead of hiding like a coward. The back atrium door opened. The wind rustled magazines on the coffee table. The footsteps entered the den, the sound of bare feet on the wood floor. The cabin suddenly felt colder. The door closed gently, the moaning wind shaking the window panes. From the kitchen, Kyle peered around the wall. The specter of the Indian girl was standing by the door, her head turned sideways, facing him. She was barely visible. Only her silver eyes, alight like beacons, were in sharp detail. She opened her mouth and uttered a hollow sound like damp wind blowing through a pipe, but no words formed. Her eyes narrowed, as if frustrated. The girl motioned with her arm, gesturing for Kyle to follow. She moved toward the hallway. Again, she flickered in and out, a stuttering projection of a girl advancing 5 feet at a time. She opened the door to Elkhart's study and disappeared around the wall. Kyle moved slowly into the den, unsure of whether to follow her. He could hear Detective Winterbone at the back of his mind calling him a chicken shit. At the far end of the cabin, another door opened and then came a crash. Shit. He ran into the study and flipped on the light. The closet door was open and a box of files had fallen to the floor. The girl was gone. Kyle turned over the box and put the files back in. From one folder, a yellow newspaper clipping fell to the floor. He picked it up and saw a familiar high school portrait of a teenage girl with black braids. Kyle's heart nearly stopped. The headline read, Missing Cree Girl's Body Found Floating in Lake Aquacapi. The file was full of clippings of articles about 16-year-old Nina Whitefeather, who had been murdered over 20 years ago. Nina used to babysit him. Nina used to babysit him, Eric, and Shauna. Nina cooked meals with their mother and read bedtime stories to the kids. Then came the dark period after Nina went missing. Their babysitter had been found dead months later, but Kyle never knew the details because the adults had kept silent. Even in Hagen's Cove, where rumors spread like wildfire, no one had talked about Nina Whitefeather's death. Kyle opened the folder and read one of the articles. Nina had been raped and lacerated with multiple knife wounds. A riot between the Cree tribe and the loggers had followed as the two opposing sides blamed the other for the girl's death. A photo depicted Cree men and women picketing Thorpe's lumber mill. Inspector Zano, an RCMP detective working the case, said he would question every male living within 50 miles of Lake Aquacapi until he found Nina's killer. The articles about her in later newspapers got smaller and smaller, and Inspector Zano's quotes lacked the conviction of the first month. Eventually, the picketing stopped. A final article, dated 2 years after the murder, stated that the white feather case had finally gone cold. Zano believed Nina's killer was a drifter who had passed through Hagen's Cove and kept going. According to Carl Hansen, dozens of women had vanished in the woods around the lake since the 1950s. Carl suspected a serial killer, Canada's Bermuda Triangle. Was Nina's death related? Kyle suddenly had a disturbing thought. What if his father killed Nina? No way. Winterbone was in Kyle's head again. Are you sure? The detective challenged. How well do you know him, really? You've only seen him a few times in 20 years. Kyle had to admit Professor John Elkhart was an enigma, a heavy drinker, notorious for disappearing for months at a time, but he was also a dedicated archaeologist, author of a number of related books, and wildly popular with his students who followed his doings on social media like he was the second coming. When he was posting anyway, which he hadn't in a while, he'd gotten fired a few years back for sleeping with one of his students who was 19, not his finest hour. Now, a more recent student, Amy Hansen, had vanished along with Elkhart and possibly an entire expedition team. If Elkhart wasn't guilty, why had Nina Whitefeather's ghost led Kyle to the box in his father's closet? There has to be another explanation. Kyle thought it was odd that his father had held one onto the clippings about Nina's murder for so many years. But then not really. Nina was practically family. Elkhart had never gotten over her death. Kyle had almost convinced himself of his father's innocence when he remembered something Jessica had said earlier. It was after Winona Thorpe had accosted her at the tavern. His father's ex-girlfriend had warned Jessica to stay away from the reservation. Then Winona said something that had stuck at the back of Kyle's mind. The sins of the father shall fall upon the sons. So that's just one chapter. The mystery goes on as Kyle and his siblings explore the the mythology and the history of the disappearances that have been happening in these woods, and they eventually discover what's been living in the woods. Um, so thank you again to Janine Pipe for inviting me to do a reading. It's been a pleasure, and I wish everyone a happy Halloween and a safe 2020.